Today, we're going to be talking about retirement. Now, retirement is a tricky topic, especially if you are on the younger side, because you're not really thinking about it. Most of us are thinking about having fun, getting out there and, just enjoying life rather than thinking about retirement because it seems so far away and sometimes it seems kind of boring, right? Why do I want to save for when I'm in old age? But it's very important because you don't want to work until the day you die. But you want to at least spend some time enjoying your life toward the latter years of your life, which is retirement for most of us. Retirement means you don't have to work anymore, ideally. So if you don't work in retirement, where does your money come from? Well, you actually have that money saved up in a retirement account, and those can be a mixture of investment accounts, savings accounts, and checking accounts, and so on. Now, there are many ways to save. Personally, I use a 401k and an IRA, but I don't want to dive too deep into those topics because it can get very complicated very fast, especially when we're talking about taxes. But there's another topic I want to focus on today. It's about the idea of how much you should save. This question is very tricky because to save now for retirement, you have to weigh the trade-offs. Do you want to enjoy life now, right, which means spending money for a vacation, saving for additional education, and so on, versus saving for another time in the future, which is retirement. And you have to be able to weigh those trade-offs so that you're not just saving everything for retirement so that you can't enjoy life right now. Or what if you're enjoying life too much now and you have nothing saved for retirement? Both of those are not the best scenarios, depending on what your financial situation is looking like. But ideally, you want to strike a good balance between the two. So retirement for many people can be 30, 40 years off, right? So really far away, basically. Recent studies have shown that most people actually start saving for retirement in their 30s, which kind of makes sense, right? Some people say your 20s are the best years of your life. Some may agree, some may disagree. But generally speaking, after your 20s, people start taking their financial life more seriously, right? They start thinking about retirement. They start thinking about, where should my money be allocated so that it makes the most money for me and it makes the most sense. Obviously, the earlier you save, the better. If you're watching this video and you're in your 20s, great. You're getting started early and you're starting to save. If you're watching this video in your 30s, not terrible, right? Most people are saving in their 30s, and that's a great place to start, if any. The best time to start is now when it comes to investing. How much to save is one of those really tricky questions because everyone's giving you a different answer. It should be a different answer. Everyone's retirement is going to look different, right? Some people want to spend more money in retirement. Some people want to spend less money in retirement. And some people just want to spend the same amount of money in retirement, whatever that looks like. Obviously, it's different for everyone. Most financial professionals recommend that you save 15%. You're going to see this 50% number across the board everywhere. And it's not a terrible recommendation, right? If it works, if you don't really have a plan in mind and you don't have a good idea about what retirement looks like for you just yet. But I would argue you can take it a step further, right? You can do your own research to figure out, does 15% work for me or not? Obviously, a one-size-fits-all number is not going to work for everyone. When they say 15%, what they mean is 15% of your gross income most of the time. If you make $50,000, that translates to $7,500 per year or $625 per month. Now, that's not a small amount by any means. If you have student loans, if you have to pay for rent or even a mortgage, or if you're thinking about starting a family, right, there's going to be a lot of costs that add up that make it very difficult to save that amount when it comes to retiring. Do you actually need $625 or can you save a little bit less? I understand that it's very difficult to predict how much money you'll need in retirement or in 30, 40 years from now, basically. You're going to have to make some predictions off your current living standards and off your current expenses. An idea about what it looks like in retirement is better than not having any idea at all and just saving blindly or not saving at all. So the way I would look at it is if you save too much for retirement, no big deal. You have more money to spend in retirement. Maybe you take an extra vacation every year or two. If you don't have enough money saved for retirement, then that becomes a little bit more complicated, right? Where are you going to get the extra cash from? Do you have enough to live? You don't want to be living near the poverty line during your most vulnerable years in old age, right? It's something very important to consider, especially with high healthcare costs and just possibly a high standard of living depending on where you are. Luckily for us, I created a spreadsheet, which I will share with everyone, right? So you can take a look at it. If you like the spreadsheet, feel free to copy it and save it to your own Google Drive and edit it from there. But I'm going to teach you how to use it and how these formulas are working. Basically, you're just changing the numbers on top, and we're going to walk through a quick example right now. Now, we're going to make a few assumptions here. Some of those assumptions may be generous, but work with me and maybe we can get somewhere. Of course, if your numbers look different, that's the beauty of the spreadsheet. You can adjust it as needed. For example, here we are starting out with $60,000 as someone's salary, assuming a raise of 3% each year just to adjust for inflation. So it's very conservative, right? It's assuming that you're not getting an actual real raise every year. Most of us are going to ask for raises, hopefully, and we'll get a raise that's larger than inflation from time to time. And of that $60,000, we'll save 15% every year, right? Let's just use their recommended suggestion and go from there. And then we could adjust it upwards and downwards as needed. As we said before, we'll start the age at 30. Most people start saving in their 30s, so it makes sense to really start from that age versus starting much earlier. So let's just say that you retire at 62. 62 is the age at which you can first start getting Social Security, right? So it's like a good ballpark for that age. Obviously, there's no hard age for retirement. Really, the only hard number for retirement is how much you have saved for retirement. If you have nothing saved, well, you can't retire. So it's very important to get a head start on these things. Now you'll see that if you reach 62 with these numbers, with an average return of 7%, which is conservative in many ways, you'll have $1.5 million adjusted for inflation. Obviously, these are all just estimates, right? You can't just say, hey, I'm going to have exactly $1.5 million when I hit 62, right? It's not true. It's going to be a little bit higher. It's going to be a little bit lower, but on average, given past historical data, that's what it's going to look like. But this is a start, if any, to figure out how much you should start saving for retirement when it comes to investing. Now you have to ask yourself the big question: is $1.5 million enough for me to live off of every year until I pass away, right? That's the idea here. If you have children or grandchildren, you want to leave money to them, right? That's a possibility as well. So you don't have to spend all $1.5 million, but you want to make sure that you have at least enough money to get you to end of life in a way, right? This $1.5 million isn't tax-free. Some of it may be, depending on how you save that amount of money, but probably a good portion of it isn't tax-free. So you do have to pay taxes on it, and chances are you're going to basically convert this 1.5 million into a yearly salary that you withdraw from these accounts every year. And then it'll include taxes, it'll include any other thing that you might have to pay for. And this yearly salary will go towards paying for insurance, will go towards paying for necessities, right? Other things that you enjoy in life. So to figure out this number, right, how much can you withdraw from these accounts safely, right? You don't want to withdraw all the money all at once. Then you have to pay a huge tax bill. So that's not ideal. But you don't want to withdraw too much, because what if you withdraw so much that your money actually decreases much faster than anticipated? Then you have no money when it comes to much later in retirement in your latter years. Or if you withdraw too little, that doesn't make sense either, because you still want to be able to live. There's this idea of the 4% withdrawal rule. And just like how it sounds, you can withdraw 4% of your wealth each year for roughly 30 years. Right? So this research was done a couple decades ago by a bunch of professors, and you can read more about the study here. Keep in mind that this study has other important details in it, including what to invest in and how the data was derived. Right? So there's that. There's also some caveats to keep in mind. But otherwise, once you read the study and you figure out, hey, what should I be investing in after retirement to make it last as long as possible, it'll give you a good idea about how to proceed from there. I will say that this study is also heavily debated, and there's been a few edits on that study in the past years. Generally speaking, it's a well-accepted format for people who are retiring early. And if people are retiring early are using this percentage and this 4%, people who are retiring at a normal age of 62 are probably fine to use that as well, because those people have to make their money stretch much longer. With that out of the way, 4% of $1.5 million roughly translates to $64,000. So that's something to keep in mind. 1.5 million is not that much money when you convert it into a livable salary, right? $64,000 is very different from the salary that you retired with at 62, which can be as high as $154,000, assuming that you get a raise for inflation every year going forward. That's a huge thing to consider. You have to make a lot of money to actually start saving for retirement and be able to retire with a reasonable salary. Right? So there are a couple things to think about. You can start saving earlier, or you can start saving more. Right? So this is 15%. So maybe you need more than 50% or less, depending on what your life looks like once you begin retirement. Now, keep in mind, this assumes that you just stop working, right? You stop working and you live off of just your investments, right? So 4% of all of that, right? So you do have to pay taxes on the $64,000. It's not going to be a clean $64,000 that it gets deposited into your bank account every year. Right? Some years you may even spend less than 4%, but I would say that 4% is probably a safe benchmark. There are considerations to be made for what your life specifically looks like, right? Do you have a budget? What are your expenses? What are your yearly expenses? It's going to be a little skewed toward the lower end now because your employer does probably cover some of your costs, including healthcare. But at the very least, if you can figure out what your expenses are today, that's the low bar. Expenses can always go up, but at least you need a minimum, right, to figure out what your minimum is. So make sure to find out what your expenses are today, and that'll probably give you a good idea about what amount of money you need every year in retirement. Of course, if you crush the numbers, nothing makes sense, it doesn't add up, well, there's also another option. A lot of retirees actually start thinking about downsizing. Right? Do you actually need a home that huge anymore? Right? Let's say you had kids, so you got a larger home. But once you retire and you don't have kids anymore, you can think about downsizing your home. In which case, you'll probably sell off your home, so you have more assets, right? More money for retirement, and then you'll purchase a much smaller home. Right? So it will offset a lot of costs associated with what comes with a larger home, including repairs. And downsizing doesn't also mean downsizing your living space, right? It's also about where you live. If you live in New York City or another high cost of living area, consider going to a low cost of living area where the dollar will stretch much further. And if you're curious about, where should I move? What are the options for moving? You can check out this data set of locations and what cost of living looks like based on certain categories in different cities, right? So it'll give you a good idea. The one thing to keep in mind is that there is a margin of error because don't forget, we still have Social Security. Social Security is monthly income we receive from the government for the years that we've worked and paid Social Security taxes. Right? So you still have that. You also probably still have Medicare, right? So Medicare will kick in and it will offset some of your health costs. So there is a buffer zone here. Obviously, it's not huge, right? Depending on what your Social Security looks like, but you'll have some buffer. But you don't want to live off of just Social Security because that'll definitely, probably most likely put you in the poverty level of income, right? So it's really important to save on top of that and not depend solely on Social Security because there are issues with Social Security. It's going to be around, but it's probably going to be much less than you initially thought it would be. If you want more information about your Social Security, make sure to sign up for ssa.gov. Now, the first step here, if you take anything away from this, is to take a look at the spreadsheet, figure out, hey, am I saving enough for retirement? These numbers are averages and they're based on historical data. So it's not going to be completely accurate going forward in the future, but it'll give you an idea, right? It'll give you an idea about should you save more or should you save less. If you find out that you don't have enough money based on the 4% rule in retirement, reconsider, right? Reconsider your living style, reconsider the job that you have, right? Reconsider saving more money. If you find out that you have too much money in retirement, then maybe you should live life more now, right? So it's all about figuring out, where you stand on things. If you're thinking about FIRE, maybe this sheet isn't for you, or you could adjust the numbers a little bit, right? Maybe you don't want to retire in your 60s. Maybe you want to move it up a bit earlier. Maybe you want to retire in your 50s. What do those numbers look like? Great. Well, hopefully that spreadsheet helped you out when it comes to thinking about how much money you need to save for retirement. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.